You are listening to One Nation Under Crime, a historical, chronological, true crime podcast. Each week, we go through our nation's history and discuss cases from each year starting in 1800. I'm Kayla.
And I'm Leah.
And wow. Spooky season is off to a mad dash.
Well, there we go.
Spooky things have, in fact, been happening in our lives. Our surgery befell our household.
Oh, gosh.
The spookiest of all things.
An emergency vet trip.
It's just been, this was not, when we brought on spooky season, this was not what we anticipated.
We didn't ask for
these kinds of spooky things.
No.
So yeah.
Stressful.
How is y'all's holiday season starting out, guys? Hopefully we're starting it out. It's kind of like, what is it? March, that's like in like a lion, out like a lamb. Maybe that's what our holiday season is like. It's coming in like a lion and it's going to leave in December like a lamb.
Well, hopefully this month will just like trickle out. Like it's like a high impact and then just kind of
I think so.
out.
I think that's what we're in for. It's all of my Halloween costume has come in.
Ooh,
I'm excited.
I can't wait to see it. All I've seen so far is the shoes.
The shoes. You've seen the shoes. So I'm excited. This is a character I feel in my bones is me to my core.
Yes.
So I have a significant other who has agreed to dress up with me.
Which is amazing.
So
I only got my husband to do it once and we weren't married yet.
Well, it is the easiest costume.
Yeah.
Because I told him, I was like, you can wear boat shoes, which he wears all the time. I was like, jeans, like a blue collared shirt, short sleeve, long sleeve, doesn't matter. Because then you're gonna need a white, like I can buy just like a white sweater or sweatshirt. And I was like, and the only thing left is your orange ascot.
There you go.
And he was like, that actually is pretty easy. So if you could not guess, he's going to be Fred and I'm going to be Velma. So
just hilarious.
I can't be Daphne. Like I don't embody Daphne.
I could totally be Daphne.
So you could. I could not. You have the hair for Daphne too.
Absolutely.
I have the hair and the glasses for Velma.
Yeah. I could totally be Daphne.
And so I'm pretty excited. My whole costume has come in now.
Do you know the costume that I got Michael to dress up as? We were Sandy and Danny.
That sounds accurate, honestly. But I mean, it's one of those things where I was like, this is the easiest costume you could ever wear.
Well, all he had to do was wear jeans and a white t-shirt, and he already had a black leather jacket.
I mean, it works out so well.
We just cut out from white paper T-birds, and put it on there. I mean, it works out well when these things happen. And so I think my shoes are super cute anyways. They really are.
They're very, I don't know.
They're very non-Kayla. They're very Leah.
They're very Leah, but they're also very like, they're very retro. They're really cute. They're these like patent leather Mary Jane, like chunky heels, but they're really cute. The heels themselves are cute. So
they're red.
Which
is why they're not Kayla.
No. And I have like the orange socks that come up to my knees. Like I got everything. So
I can't wait to see pictures.
Very excited about that. That's going to be a fun time.
It will be fun.
We have plans and it's going to be a fun weekend.
I have a t-shirt that says, "Hey boo." That's about all I got.
I just love spooky season.
Oh yes. Look, I had a little black dog and I made her a bat costume.
Honestly, what else do you need?
She was adorable.
What else do you need? My
sweet Thelma Lou. She was the cutest bat in the world.
I don't dress up the animals. Two of them you might be doing an episode on my demise if I dress them up.
Yes.
The other one, he would not be happy about it.
Yeah, Thelma Lou did not enjoy the dressing up. Now, Leonard thinks he is the bee's knees.
Oh, I bet he does.
When you put something on him, he's just like, look, check me out. I have on clothes. I am so
Which is
handsome.
very honestly fitting. But
it cracks me up. You would think that Sheldon would be the one because he's the bougie dog.
I would think so, but
Leonard is just like,
Leonard likes to feel fancy.
He does, apparently.
It's quite wonderful, but I hope all of your spooky seasons are going well at this point. We have reached
not as crazy as ours.
Not as crazy as ours, maybe more fun. We have reached the halfway point of October. So I hope all of you are having a good time. We went to the pumpkin patch last weekend and had a good time. We took kids and got to do that. And
got a pretty green pumpkin.
That one was from Publix.
Oh, I got my bumpy. Yep. I got a bumpy green pumpkin and a white pumpkin from Publix.
So I got 2 good pumpkins that I was going to stack on top of each other from the pumpkin patch. Mm-hmm. And because my significant other has one arm right now,
he has 2 arms. He has 2. He's just down one
at the moment. And so I was carrying both of them because I didn't want to ask him to carry them. And so, well, as I was going to the car, the top one fell.
Oh, no.
And so it cracked before we even made it to the car.
Pumpkin guts.
Well, it had only cracked. It wasn't open.
Oh, so you can make it spooky and moldy.
Well, what I did is I was just like, you know what? Forget it. So we cut it and took all the pumpkin seeds out. So he made salt and vinegar pumpkin seeds that were really good. And then we took the pumpkin insides. And last night, super fancy over here, I actually made a pumpkin prosciutto pasta.
Uh-oh.
It was like a pumpkin prosciutto and sage, almost like a carbonara, but without eggs.
Who are you? And
right?
What have you done with my friend Kayla?
I know. It was a shock, honestly. And even
guys, she is growing plants and cooking food.
I know.
An alien invasion has occurred.
I mean, I'm okay with it.
Invasion of the body snatchers.
Yeah, my plants they're nice.
She has a plant stand. She has an app for watering them.
It's growth.
They have names.
2022 is about growth.
Wow.
And so, yeah, but even he ate it last night and he's usually the cook and he was like, this is really good. And because when I told him what I was going to do, his immediate response was, you might want to have a backup. And then he ate it and he was like, this is actually really good. So it tasted like a carbonara pasta, but
nice.
But it was pumpkin.
You offered me no leftovers.
I mean, there's leftovers in the fridge if you want to. Oh, because we did homemade pasta too. So you might actually want to take those with you if you want them.
Okay.
Because there's a good bit.
Okay.
So, yes. So that has been our time. So we are off to another terrifying episode, honestly, this week because
it's fitting with our week.
It is actually. It's we're gonna dig into a good bit of history this week.
I like history.
So we are in episode 72 this week, trucking right along. Our sources for this week: Civil War on the Western Border.
Ooh.
It's one of them. So that gives you a little bit of an insight. We're not quite to the Civil War yet, but we're getting there.
On the cusp.
So then I have ushistory.org and PBS. So as you can see, very, very studious sources this week. Our events for 1856, January 8th, Dr. John Vetch discovered borax in Tucson Springs, California.
He's so vetch.
I didn't know that borax was something discovered.
Yeah.
I thought it was something someone made.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know. That shows what I picked up in chemistry. But
friend.
I had to go to summer school for chemistry. We don't have to talk about it.
I barely passed, and I did make it through college without having to take it. Praise the
It was pretty
Lord.
bad. And then February 1st. We talked about the other one already. Mm-hmm. Now it's only fitting we get to this one.
Okay.
Auburn University in Alabama was first chartered as the East Alabama Male College. So we've now talked about both in our state so far. I did double check. I looked up as I was doing these notes to make sure our college had not come up yet. I was like, I want to make sure I didn't miss it yet.
Yes.
No, we've got several years until we get there. So
Yeah, it was in the 20s, I believe. No?
When it moved to the name it is now.
Oh.
But it's another one like this where they, it was chartered as something else first. Because it was an all-girls college first. And then it was they just celebrated
Founders Day.
Founders?
Yeah. It was this past week.
Yeah, it was. It was just this past week. I was asking, so did they do life raft debate when you were there?
I really don't know. I was not that involved in that stuff.
I asked my boyfriend if they did the life raft debate at his college, and he said no.
I don't even know what that is.
It's fantastic. It's the funniest and best thing. Basically, all the departments go head to head, and it's a debate, obviously, life raft debate. And the entire premise, it's done every year, and an oar, like a massive oar, is given away as like it's one that like it's passed around each year. So like you have to give it up, and then you have to like win it back for your department.
Okay.
And the debate is the world has ended.
Oh, dear.
You have a life raft. There is only one spot left on the raft that you can fill. Which department is going to fill it?
Oh.
And why is your department, what in your study makes your study the reason to be here so that like the life can go on? Like, so why are the arts the most important? Like, why are the arts most important? Like, what of the arts would help civilization continue? Like what about science? What about math? What about English? Like foreign languages, all these different things. And so they kind of debate back and forth. It's really funny and it's really interesting because they have to get really creative.
Yeah.
As to why, like history, like why do we need history?
Right.
And I remember one of the years that I went, the history professor was like, we've shown history repeats itself. So I think you would want me there so you know what not to do. It was like, you're right. But
that makes sense.
So it's fun. So every year, and it kind of like, it knocks down like people in the audience, like real time vote as to who they want to kick off the life raft. And so they like go through rounds, and then at the end it's two departments head to head, and you have to decide like who's the last one standing to be let on to continue civilization. And so yeah, we were talking about it a lot, and I was like, I wonder, and he was like, my college definitely didn't do that. So I don't know when it started, because we also have the finding of the crook every year too.
Yeah.
Which I know that's been a big thing, which is like the department puts out like riddles, and you have to go around campus and find the crook. And so,
which is a crooked stick.
Yes, it's not like a burglar.
Yes. just so you know.
But yeah. So yes, it's a fun time. But let's see. On to February 2nd, Dallas, Texas was incorporated as a city. So
I've been there.
I have. I will say it's a little overrated. I know we have some listeners in Dallas, so hello to our Dallasites.
Dallasonians.
But I even have heard from some people from Dallas that they were like, it's fine, but it's not, like super as big as, like, a lot of people are like, yeah, I mean, if you want to go to the grassy knoll, you can.
I've gotten lost in Dallas.
See, I've spent my time in Austin now. That's where I've spent the most of my time in Texas. And so I think I'm a little biased to Austin.
I've gotten stranded in Houston.
Yeah. Yeah, you have.
Been a pirate, apparently.
So, fun times. Hello to our Dallas listeners.
Hi.
We've gotten some new listeners these past few weeks from some very interesting city names. So,
hi, new listeners.
Yeah,
welcome aboard.
I can see who they are, and I'm like, oh, that's a name.
We will gladly welcome you to our life raft.
Yes, you can be on our life raft. We might not let math on, but We'll see.
No, we'll let you on so we don't have to do it. Come on, think about this.
The year that I was there, my favorite, that I was in math, the year that I was there, my math professor won for the math department, and he was wonderful. He was also the chess champion of the state of Alabama.
Cool.
So, but it was funny. He was the one that helped us understand. I don't remember what theory it was that we were learning in math, but he explained it to us as like zombies. And there were zombies in a room and out of a room. And so anyways, I was like, yeah, you deserve to win. He was great. I loved him. February 12th, the American Clipper ship's driver and ocean queen left Liverpool and London, and both ended up being lost without a trace, possibly due to ice in the Atlantic, killing 497 people.
Ooh.
Just lost at sea. February 18th, the American Party, also known as the Know Nothings, we talked about them a couple of weeks ago, convened in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania to nominate their first presidential candidate, former president. Who is it?
Millard Fillmore.
You got it.
So proud of me.
You know it. You know, he's the best. He's the best. Probably not, honestly.
Yeah.
The name, the best.
But you love the way I say it.
I know. March 5th, Georgia became the first state to regulate railroads.
Interesting.
And if you ask my boyfriend, that would be Alabama, because he says he hears them all the time at my house. I never do. March 6th, the University of Maryland College Park was chartered as Maryland Agricultural College.
Okay.
March 9th, the National Fraternity Sigma Alpha Epsilon was founded at the University of Alabama. May 16th, the Vigilance Committee was founded in San Francisco, California, and it lynched 2 gangsters, arrested more Democratic Party officials, and then disbanded itself by August 18th, just a couple months later.
Well, there you go.
You know. May 22nd, Congressman Preston Brooks of South Carolina beat Senator Charles Sumner with a cane in the hall of the United States Senate for a speech Sumner had made attacking Southerners who sympathized with the pro-slavery violence in Kansas. Sumner was unable to return to duty for 3 years. He had to recover for 3 years.
Okay, so he was beaten for being pro-violence.
Hold on, because this does come back, so it is important, actually. Preston Brooks of South Carolina. Brooks beat Sumner for a speech Sumner made attacking Southerners who sympathized with pro-slavery violence. Yes, Brooks became a hero to the South who were for pro-slavery, so Sumner was speaking out against it. So Sumner was unable to return for 3 years to duty while he recovered as a senator, and Brooks became a hero across the South. And this will come back actually in our episode this week.
Goodness.
June 3rd, Cullen Whipple patented a machine for making screws.
Oh.
July 17th, 2 trains collided near Philadelphia and killed at least 59 and injuring at least 100 people. August 10th, a hurricane destroyed Last Island, Louisiana, and left 200 dead while breaking up the whole island into smaller islands. I'm not sure if we have a lot of Florida listeners, but if we do, we are thinking about you. Hurricane Ira was did a number. Yeah. My boyfriend's family has a place really close to where that hit, like very close.
Yeah.
So it actually, when they kept saying like, oh, it's heading here, one of those main cities that they kept saying was their city. Yeah. And they had no roof at the time because it was in the middle of being replaced.
Oh, joy.
Yeah. Thankfully, everything's fine. It was minimal damage to them, but it definitely hit above them. And that's where the most destruction was. So definitely thinking about that. I know that's really difficult. We've talked a lot about, I know we dug deep into Katrina in one episode. And so, yeah, it's hurricanes in the South are no joke, for sure. Hurricanes and tornadoes. Those are what get us here. So August 23rd, Kate Warren became the first female private detective and began working for the Pinkerton Detective Agency.
Good for her.
I know. Kate. Nice name. November 4th, Democrat James Buchanan defeated former President Millard Fillmore and John C. Fremont of the fledgling Republican Party and became the 15th president of the United States. November 14th, Gail Borden was issued a Borden. For a second, I was like, "Oh, that's not." Nope, that's right. Was issued
axe.
No,
for an axe.
That would be the best, but it's not. Related to his invention of condensed milk. So it is. I was like thinking, and I was like, "No, that's right. That is Borden." Okay, interesting. And then November 21st, Niagara University was founded in Niagara Falls, New York.
That's a good place for Niagara.
I've heard
University to be founded.
Yes, for sure. All right, so on to our case this week, May 24th. 1856, abolitionist John Brown and 8 others murdered 5 pro-slavery men along the banks of Pottawatomie Creek in Lane, Kansas. So yes, this, like I said, we're going to have to dig into some history because we got to talk about what's going on at this time. And I will say our episode for next week is kind of fun, but some events from this episode, we will talk about heavily in the next episode, which is kind of why I set them up this way, because you need to know why what happened here happened.
So it's not really a 2-parter, but they are linked.
In a sense, I'll say next week's episode is more fun.
Okay.
I kind of hinted at it in the last episode. But I actually added some other things to it to kind of make it, it's very fitting with what we've discussed in the past several episodes.
Okay.
Kind of all combined into one. And then one of what we're about to discuss will be pretty heavily represented, I'll say, in that episode. So the city of Lane is located on the southeastern border of Franklin County in the lower northeastern portion of Kansas. To say this town is small is an understatement.
Dear.
The 2020 census clocked the population at 241.
Booming metropolis.
So to give you specifically some context, I looked up what the 2020 census was for our cities that we live in.
Mm-hmm.
Yours was 4,000, like around 4,000. So 241 to 4,000. And for y'all, like Leah does live kind of out there. Like it's not, I wouldn't say it's not the middle of nowhere, but there's a lot.
I call it Mayberry.
It's very small compared to where I am, because where I am, 24,000.
Yeah.
So a big jump as far as that goes. But this Lane, Kansas is 241 total.
Yeah.
As
like no thousand after that.
No, just 241.
People.
They could all technically be related, honestly. And I'm not saying that in that sense. I'm just saying,
which is why I had to go out of county to get married
with 4,000 people.
Yes.
So, but 241, like that's a lot, but that's like very small when you really think about it. Like that more people were in my graduating class than.
I mean, I was going to say my graduating class, we had 150 people in my graduating class.
Yeah, so double it, and that's still more.
Yeah, and I was going to say, but that was a few years back. So I mean, it's bigger now, but still.
Yeah. So considering in this episode we are just in 1856, the city of Lane is relatively young, as its first temporary settlement was established in 1838. So not long at all, from 38 to 56. It's pretty young. And that was when Reverend Robert Simmerwell built a Baptist mission station on the southern side of Pottawatomie Creek. There is something curious about this portion of the creek, as it followed the Pottawatomie Trail of Death. We've discussed
Trail of Death.
Yeah, exactly. We've discussed before that people are garbage. And the Trail of Death is just another example of that. The Pottawatomie Trail of Death was the route taken by members of the Pottawatomie Nation as they were forced out of their home in Indiana by the militia in 1838, and they were made to go to reservation lands in eastern Kansas. The trail itself ended near what is now Pottawatomie, Kansas. So the journey was a 660-mile trek over 61 days with 859 Native members that resulted in more than 40 fatalities, most of which were children.
Oh.
This event is the single largest removal of natives from their land in Indiana history. And I will go ahead and say this. I do like to try and present both sides of things. There's a lot of debate around this event because even though the Pottawatomie had actually ceded their land to Indiana, like they ceded their land in Indiana to the federal government, so like the state of Indiana. In a series of treaties between 1818 and 1837, when the time actually came for them to leave, the chief and the Yellow River tribe at Twin Lakes like refused to leave, even though the deadline had passed for them to leave.
Oh.
So this resulted in the militia removing the natives physically from their land under the order of Indiana governor at the time, David Wallace. So that's where the debate essentially comes in. Technically, the time had passed for the natives to leave the land that they had seemingly willingly given to the state, but the manner in which the state went about it is like, we can all say very less than ideal. So that's why like it's one of those things of kind of yes and no. Like we've talked about the Trail of Tears, and that was definitely not a similar situation. It was very different. Right. So yeah, it's kind of hard to say. It's one of those things of like both sides weren't in the right.
Yeah.
But it wasn't like done the right way.
When we talked about the Mexican Robin Hood, I mean, you know, they had ceded the lands. But that didn't mean that, you know,
you couldn't come in and take it.
To come in and just, So, I mean, there was still,
Nevertheless, the church and its members on the river moved to the Kansas Valley in the 1840s, and brothers who come back, William, Peter, and Dutch Henry Sherman, his nickname was Dutch Henry, were left as the first permanent settlers. The area was actually known as Dutch Henry's Crossing due to a wagon road forged near the creek by the Sherman cabin. So the Sherman cabin was right there on the creek. There was kind of like a wagon trail that went in front of it. So it was called a Dutch Henry's Crossing. And I just put, as we've discussed the psychology of birth order before, we can only surmise that Dutch was the oldest because why else would it only be named after him?
Exactly.
The name didn't last long, though, in the area of Lane, west of Kansas Avenue, was actually originally laid out under the name Shermanville in 1855. It was renamed Lane in 1863. So at the time of our case, when we discuss it this week, it is not yet Lane. It's actually Shermanville.
Okay.
So, and it was named for James H. Lane, who was the leader of the Jayhawkers abolitionist movement, who served as one of the first senators from Kansas. So when the Missouri Pacific Railroad arrived in 1879, a competing community was laid out east of Kansas Avenue, and it was either called Emerson or Avondale. It's kind of unclear which one it was, but within 2 years, the cities ended up joining together and became the single community of Lane, and Lane was officially incorporated in 1908. Because Lane is so small, there isn't much other than the early history that we can pull. And as far as anything notable in the town, our story today is the most notable for Lane. That is because in 1856, abolitionist John Brown and several of his followers murdered 5 pro-slavery men, including William Sherman, brother to Dutch that we mentioned before. He's one of the murder victims. Near the area of Mosquito Creek and Pottawatomie Creek. Today, the event is collectively known as the Pottawatomie Massacre.
Wow.
Yes. Before we can fully dive right into the murders this week, we kind of have to talk a little bit about history in the U.S. and exactly what the political climate was at this time. We talked about the Kansas-Nebraska Act back in episode 68, and I also brought up Bleeding Kansas within the last several episodes as well. A lot of people may not understand, I've said before, I'll say it again, how important this was to the upcoming history of the United States. I cannot express it enough. Like it's one of those things that I was like, I know the Kansas-Nebraska Act and I know the Missouri Compromise because we talked about it a lot in school. Now it's kind of one of those things that I fully realize why we did. Like, it is very important.
Everything is clicked into place.
Yeah. So the Kansas-Nebraska Act was signed into law in 1854, which created the Kansas Territory and the Nebraska Territory. It opened new lands and repealed the Missouri Compromise of 1820, which allowed settlers in those territories to determine if they would allow slavery within their boundaries. Now, if we think back to our episode for 1820, the Missouri Compromise was established, which this is kind of where everything is really, really important and why this was such a big deal. The Missouri Compromise was established, which admitted Missouri as a slave state. It made Maine a free state and prohibited slavery in any of the remaining areas of the Louisiana Purchase. This is where I don't think people realize what a big deal this was, because the entire Louisiana Purchase, if you think of the map of the United States, the entire Louisiana Purchase included Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, Kansas, Oklahoma, Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, and parts of Montana, North Dakota, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, and Texas.
Like, everywhere.
Half of the country, essentially.
Everywhere.
So the Missouri Compromise, so the remaining areas that the Missouri Compromise included were everything that I just said, with the exception of Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, and a small part of Oklahoma. But the rest of it was all supposed to be anti-slavery. Like, there was not supposed to be slavery there anyway. So when the Kansas-Nebraska Act came along, it repealed all of that. So it basically said, oh, we said no slavery in these states, but just kidding. We're taking all of that back. That's why it became such a big issue, is because they were like, okay, we thought basically Louisiana, Missouri, those are going to kind of be the last slave states, period. And then the rest was going to be fine. And then the Kansas-Nebraska Act came along and was like, this is too much of a controversial issue for us. So we're going to repeal it and actually just let the states make their own decision. And that's when everybody was like, hold on a second. No.
Yeah.
We've thought this is how it was going to be for 24 years or 34 years at this point. 34 years. This is how we have thought this was going to go. And now you're just going to come back. And then also think about all the people who already lived on that land.
Right.
Who thought we're not going to have to deal with this as a problem. So that's why this became such a big issue. So we're talking about land that roughly covers 7 to 8 entire states that would not be allowed in a slave state. So it's understandable that having this appealed by the Kansas-Nebraska Act would cause like a major uproar. Instead of slavery being fully prohibited, the states would be able to decide for themselves. This effectively led to the events known as Bleeding Kansas, which I brought up.
Right.
It's also called Bloody Kansas or just the Border War. And the Pottawatomie Massacre is included in the events of Bleeding Kansas. These were a series of violent civil confrontations in the Kansas Territory and in parts of western Missouri that occurred between 1854 and 1859. So, kind of like to lead up to these events. So I said it was 1854 to 1859. We're in 56 right now. In episode 68, 1854, we talked about the act being passed into law. And we also talked about Abraham Lincoln speaking out against the Kansas-Nebraska Act. He was not happy that the Missouri Compromise was appealed. And in episode 70, in 1855, we talked about the border ruffians who were sent into Kansas to inflate the voting numbers.
Right.
So those are 2 things that have already happened up to this point, or 3 really if you think about the signing of the act. So as we can see, these events are inflating as time goes on. It's really just speaking out against it. And then the series of events include electoral fraud, raids, assaults, and murders. According to Kansaspedia, there were 56 documented political killings during this period. And the total actually might be as high as 200 because some people were not like documented politicians.
Right.
But they were political figures.
Right.
So it could be as high as 200. It has also been characterized as a tragic, it's like the quote, tragic prelude or an overture to the American Civil War, which immediately followed. So the events that occurred because of the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which then led to Bleeding Kansas, and all of these events effectively were like the beginning of the Civil War.
Yeah. This is what it was boiling, and it was, this is kind of the first little blips that kind of boil over in your pot.
Yes. And at this time, Franklin Pierce is the president. We will get back to him next week.
Mm-hmm.
He is the one, you got to remember these things because it feeds into a lot of what happens next. And why some things were amiss during his presidency, I believe. So we'll talk more about that as well. So John Brown is at the center of the Pottawatomie Massacre, and his level of involvement is still up for debate as well as speculation. He was born on May 9th of 1800, making him a Taurus, fittingly in Torrington, Connecticut, which just makes me think of Bring It On. Torrance.
I'm with you. I was tracking.
I know. Just making sure all the other understood as well. You saw the spark in my eyes. I just had to make sure. He was the fourth of 8 to parents Owen Brown and Ruth Mills. Later on, John Brown described his parents as, quote, poor but respectable, which changes. So it's interesting that he described them as that. He was named after his uncle, Captain John Brown, who fought and died in the Revolutionary War. And in 1857, Brown stated that he descended from Peter Brown, one of the Pilgrim Fathers who landed from the Mayflower at Plymouth, Massachusetts in 1620. And there is actually there's some accounts that say he was an ancestor of Peter Brown, but Peter Brown actually didn't get here until 1650, not 1620. So he wasn't one of like the original Mayflower arrivers.
But still, he was an early on
settler. Yeah. As a child in 1805, the family moved to Hudson, Ohio, not Houston, which at the time was mostly wilderness, and it became the most anti-slavery region of the country. Brown's father was friends with the founder of Hudson, David Hudson, who was an abolitionist. Owen Brown used his connections and worked his way up to become a leading and wealthy citizen of Hudson. So his family went from nothing to being extremely wealthy. His father opened a tannery and employed Jesse Grant, who, fun fact, is the father of President Ulysses S. Grant.
Cool.
So his dad employed the dad of a future president. Brown's mother, Ruth, died in 1808, and he wrote a letter that he wrote later, like kind of in like it's either a letter or a journal, that while he respected his father's new wife, he never had an emotional connection with her, and the death of his own mother was one he mourned for years after. When he was 12, he worked with a man moving cattle, and he saw another boy who was working with him being beaten in front of him with an iron shovel.
Ooh.
When Brown asked why the boy was beaten and he wasn't, because they had done the same exact thing, the answer was that the other boy was a slave. This is allegedly when John Brown dedicated his life to improving conditions for both slaves and freed slaves. Brown became the leading exponent of violence in the American abolitionist movement, and he believed that violence was necessary to end American slavery since decades of peaceful efforts had failed. He said repeatedly that in working to free the enslaved, he was following Christian ethics, including the Golden Rule, as well as the U.S. Declaration of Independence, which stated that all men are created equal. He took that very much to heart. While running a successful tannery himself, John Brown married Dianthe Lusk. So It's Dianthe. So I'm not sure if it's Dianthe or Dianthe. Unsure. Interesting name, though. He married her in 1820, and while we aren't sure what she looked like because there are no photos of her, funny enough, there are a lot of photos of him. And we'll talk about that more, which is funny because now we're getting into the time where there are photos of people.
Yeah, it's not just paintings or drawings,
and they're like
actual photos.
And they're like the daguerreotypes that we talked about before, the different types of photography where you had to stand there like perfectly still for like a minute.
Or be blurred.
Yeah. So John described her as, quote, a remarkably plain but neat, industrious, and economical girl of excellent character, earnest piety, and practical common sense.
I would hate to be described that way. That means she ugly.
Industrious and economical and remarkably plain. Like, she was your wife. Their first child, John Jr., was born 13 months later. And in 1825, despite the success of the tannery and having built a substantial house the year before, Brown and his family sought out a safer location for fugitive slaves and moved to New Richmond, Pennsylvania. This was actually pretty interesting. He bought 200 acres of land. He cleared an eighth of it and immediately went to building a cabin, a 2-story tannery with 18 vats, and a barn.
Wow.
The barn is the interesting part because the barn had a secret, well-ventilated room that was to hide escaping slaves. And this is astonishing, from 1825 to 1835, so a matter of 10 years, the tannery was an important stop on the Underground Railroad.
That's amazing.
And during this time, Brown is estimated to have helped over 2,500 enslaved people on their journey to Canada.
That is fantastic.
So we're going to kind of go through this back and forth with John Brown, where like he did really great things and then really terrible things. So it's like, it's kind of one of those things that's like, oh, he did so much good, but he did so much bad. Like
kind of misguided.
Yeah, but in a sense, like, dude, you know that's wrong. You knew that was wrong. You know, it's kind of one of those things of it's not a hazy gray area. You know, it's not one of those where it's like, no, that was wrong. You shouldn't have done that. But I mean, he was an important stop on the Underground Railroad, which is amazing. In 1831, Brown's son, Frederick, died at the age of 4. Brown fell ill and his business began to suffer, leaving him in severe debt. And in the summer of 1832, his wife, Dianthe, one of the two, died either during childbirth or as an immediate result of childbirth. It's unclear, but their son also did not survive the birth.
Both of which were common at that time.
Yes. So she died in the summer of 1832, and just a year later, on July 14th of 1833, Brown married 17-year-old. So he would have been 33 at the time.
Okay.
He married 17-year-old Mary Ann Day, and she was the younger sister of Brown's housekeeper at the time.
Okay.
John and Mary would eventually have 13 children. And when you add the 5 from his previous marriage, there were a total of 18 children. I shouldn't have to say it. Way too many.
Wait. Is that including the 2 that perished?
No.
Oh, okay.
No. These are all living children. Yeah. 7 of those were sons who worked for their father in the fight to abolish slavery. So we talked about this specifically. It's very interesting how this episode is tying back to a lot of things that we've discussed before. Do you remember Elijah P. Lovejoy? We talked about him back in episode 40. He was a printer. He printed things and was murdered.
Yes, okay. I do. Yes, I do.
So in 1837, in the response to the murder of Elijah P. Lovejoy, Brown publicly vowed, quote, "Here before God in the presence of these witnesses, from this time I consecrate my life to the destruction of slavery." And if we remember, Elijah Lovejoy was printing anti-slavery newspapers and pamphlets, and that's what got him killed.
Right.
They had originally destroyed his printing press once. He moved it across the river to the other side.
Right.
We're actually going to talk about the exact place that happened again, where he was murdered in that same town. We'll come back too. So we'll talk about that in just a bit. So by 1855, John had more than his share of ups and downs. More of his children died. He made money. He lost a lot more than he had. And this led him to Kansas. 5 of his sons, John Jr., Jason, Owen, Frederick, and Salmon. If y'all could have seen, Leah was looking down the jerk up of her head.
I mean, you got that many kids, you run out of regular names.
Either Salmon or Salmon. However I say salmon.
Do not
I know. I say
pronounce
salmon. Salmon. For a minute, I typed Solomon. Because I swore, I was like, Solomon. And then I kept looking at it and I was like, that word is not Solomon. What is this word? And then I went, salmon? Okay.
Surely they meant Solomon.
No, it's salmon. It's salmon.
Oh, no.
And maybe they were trying to name him Sam and then heard salmon one time and they were just like, oh, and then they were like, oh, you spelled that wrong. And they were like, okay, sure. Solomon. And then they were like, yeah, we call him salmon. And then they're like, oh, that's a fish. That makes more sense now. Anyways, they moved to the Kansas Territory in the spring of 1855. John and his son Oliver and his son-in-law Henry Thompson moved later that year. John's wife, Mary, refused to relocate to Kansas, and she did not move with him. Nope. She's like, I am not here for this disaster coming. She knew something was coming, and she's like,
I'm not having any more kids.
No, I'm not going to be. You should probably go. TV's not a thing yet. You got to go. I can't do this. I mean, she herself had 13 children, so she was done. They walk out at that point. It has to be. They do.
God.
I'm just saying, like, at that point, like when you've not had a child, but I have, and it's one of those.
Had a child.
No, and it's one of those things where you're like, oh, this could be that. It could be that. Like by your 8th, I'm pretty sure you could look at your watch and be like, it's 3 a.m. They should be here, like a dinner guest arriving. It should be about 7 p.m. tonight. They'll be here. Like you have to think.
God.
That's a lot of children.
That's a lot.
Routine is what I'm looking for. Like it's got to just be very routine at that point. So, and also, yeah, that's a lot of kids. That's a lot of kids.
I watched Call the Midwife. Okay. If you haven't watched Call the Midwife, you need to watch Call the Midwife. It is amazing. British show about midwives, funnily enough.
Interesting.
That starts in the 1950s.
Funnily
in
named.
like, in the slums in New York. I mean, New York, in London.
London's like East End.
Yes. But a lot of the women who are having babies, some of them have had multiple, and they've kind of said the same things like, this is what I know. I know about having babies. I know, and then kind of the same, like,
your body, it's like your body knows at that point what to do. Like the first time your body's like, oh, we don't know what we're doing. Like by 8, your body's like,
the mom knows what's happening.
We're good.
Yeah.
We're good. We got this. So it's a lot.
My husband watched a birth on that with me, like for the first time. I just watched the latest season and he was like, oh God. Like he watches all these blood and guts movies and all this stuff. That grossed him out. And I was like,
I could see it.
Really? That?
I could see it, honestly.
Anyway, continue.
So John Brown and the other free state settlers were optimistic that they could bring Kansas into the Union as a free state because Kansas was at this point still trying to vote on whether they were going to be a free state. So after the winter storms thawed in 1856, The pro-slavery activists began a campaign to seize Kansas on their own terms. Brown was severely affected by the event known as the Sacking of Lawrence. This is very important. There is a difference. There's two different events that occur in Lawrence. This is specifically the sacking of Lawrence. So this occurred on May 21st of 1856 when pro-slavery settlers attacked Lawrence, Kansas. The town had been founded in 1854 by anti-slavery settlers from Massachusetts who also wanted to make Kansas a free state. So Massachusetts actually at the time had a committee, I guess we'll say, that funded people to move to states that had not voted on slavery yet, and they funded them to move there.
Oh.
And so that it would be like a free state. So Massachusetts was one of those states that did that. And a lot of people in Lawrence, Kansas were from Massachusetts, and they were all anti-slavery. So that was when Sheriff Sheriff Samuel J. Jones attacked the town with a group of pro-slavery settlers. On that day, one person who was actually a member of the pro-slavery gang was killed, and his death was deemed accidental. However, Sheriff Jones and his men halted production of the Free State newspapers. During the attack, the Free State Hotel and Charles L. Robinson's house were both destroyed. Keep the Free State Hotel in your mind for next week. The violence against abolitionists was accompanied by celebrations in the pro-slavery press, with writers such as Dr. John J. Stringfellow of the Squatter Sovereign proclaiming that pro-slavery forces, quote, are determined to repel this northern invasion and make Kansas a slave state, though our rivers should be covered with the blood of their victims and the carcasses of the abolitionists should be so numerous in the territory as to breed disease and sickness. We will not be deterred from our purpose.
Wow.
Brown was outraged by both the violence in the pro-slavery forces and what he saw as a weak and cowardly response by the anti-slavery partisans and the Free State settlers. In addition, we talked about it in our events. On May 22nd, Brown learned about the caning of abolitionist Charles Sumner by pro-slavery Representative Preston Brooks on the floor of Congress.
Which, that is very poor taste.
That led to these events. So that's why we have to talk about all those events before we can get to the Pottawatomie Massacre. John Brown Sr., because there is a John Jr., but when I say Brown, we're talking about the father. I don't think I even actually bring up him except his son, except one more time maybe. Him and the Pottawatomie Company, an informal militia group, marched towards Lawrence to protect the town from the pro-slavery men intent on its destruction. After joining with a similar company from the anti-slavery town of Pottawatomie, the men traveled north until they received word that they were actually too late to prevent the attack on the town. It had already finished. They were done. While camped near Palmyra, which is where Elijah Lovejoy was.
Gotcha.
Brown resolved to take his revenge on the pro-slavery neighbors and enlisted the help of an associate named James Townsley to carry him, his sons, Frederick, Oliver, Owen, Salmon, and Watson, as well as his son-in-law, Henry Thompson, back toward Pottawatomie Creek. And then there was someone else who kind of followed them behind. His name was Theodore Weiner. He kind of followed behind. He wasn't like a part of their group, but he was like, I'm going to kind of see what's going on. That's not how it ended up. He actually ended up being involved, but
he was a lurker.
Yeah, he was kind of a lurker. Like he wasn't invited, but he went. So John Jr. objected to them leaving, but seeing that his father was not backing down, he accepted it and told his father to, quote, do nothing rash. After crossing Mosquito Creek, the group of men camped for the night of May 23rd and most of the following day. Around 10 p.m. on the 24th, the group left their campsite and headed for the cabin of pro-slavery settler James Doyle. Once they arrived, they demanded that he and his sons come outside. Doyle and his sons were led a short distance from the cabin where John Brown shot James Doyle in the head with his pistol as two of Brown's sons hacked James' sons to death.
That's not cool.
James' sons named were Drury and William Doyle. And James Doyle did have a third son. He was 16 years old, but he was not a member of the pro-slavery group, the Law and Order Party, and his mother pleaded for his life and he was spared.
Wow.
So one of the three sons lived because he wasn't a member of the party and his mother begged for him to not be murdered and he wasn't and they left.
Wow.
We're not done. The group then traveled to Alan Wilkinson's home. Wilkinson's wife was sick with the measles, and when the men arrived at the home, she fought back against the men, telling them to not take her husband. They took Wilkinson anyway, where he was slashed and stabbed to death by Henry Thompson and Theodore Weiner. Like I said, he was a lurker. He ended up being involved. Once done, they crossed to the southern bank of the creek at Dutch Henry's Ford. Remember Dutch Henry?
Mm-hmm.
They approached the home of James Harris, where they found a group of several men, John Whiteman, Jerome Glanville, and William Sherman, the brother of Dutch Henry. Brown questioned them about their views on slavery and whether they had participated in the attack on Lawrence earlier in the week. William Sherman's answers did not satisfy Brown, and he was killed behind the residence and his body left in the creek. They learned from William before slaughtering him that his brother, Dutch Henry, who was allegedly their main target, was away from home, and the group decided they were done for the night, and they rejoined the Pottawatomie Company on the night of May 25th.
Wow.
John Brown and his followers were hunted well into the summer. Federal troops arrested two of Brown's sons who had not been with him. Border ruffians burned down the Browns' homesteads, but John Brown lived on to fight another day. Men on both sides continued to organize into armed groups and began patrolling the area in search of their enemies, resulting in engagements such as the Battle of Blackjack, where John Brown took a number of pro-slavery men prisoner, the Battle of Pottawatomie, in which Brown and his men were unable to protect the anti-slavery town home from being looted and burned by border ruffians, and Brown's son Frederick was also killed during that battle. Now a fugitive, he traveled north, where he was received by abolitionists as almost a cult hero. The new territorial governor, John Geary, had mostly restored order in the territory, although violence flared up regularly until 1858. The Pottawatomie Massacre and other attacks that marked Bleeding Kansas are considered by many historians to have been the opening shots of the Civil War.
Yeah.
However, this would not be the last America would hear of John Brown. He would make national headlines again at the Harper's Ferry raid in 1859. This led to John Brown being sentenced to death, and it was the first trial in the U.S. to be nationally reported.
Ooh.
So some were regionally reported, but it was not common for it to be nationally reported.
Right.
So this was their OJ.
Yeah.
Like this was their OJ. Among the spectators of John Brown's execution were future Confederate General Stonewall Jackson, and you might know him, John Wilkes Booth. The poet Walt Whitman described the viewing of the execution in the title Years of Meteors, and that is the Pottawatomie Massacre and John Brown.
It's very sad.
It is, and it's just another example of hate.
Yeah.
Like hate on all ends, on all sides of the spectrum.
Very misguided vengeance. I mean, he thought he was fighting for a good cause, but the way with which he went about it was just as
bad as the other side. Yeah. I mean, it's one of those things of yeah, like your heart's in the right place, maybe.
Yeah. Misguided.
Yeah. So yeah, we had to jump onto that for this week because next week this ties a lot into our episode, we'll say. I promised a spooky episode for spooky season.
Spooky.
I have delivered. So we're actually going to record that next, so Leah does not have to wait. But we will get to that. Yes. We have a website where you can find any and all ONUC information you're looking for. It's onenationundercrime.com. We are One Nation Under Crime everywhere you can find us. Please follow us, subscribe, recommend us to everyone you know. Leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts, and go to a pumpkin patch.
Yeah.
Go
to talk to people about us there.
You can do that. Watch Scream.
Yes.
I Know What You Did Last Summer. Any of those, any of the nice ones. Hocus Pocus 2.
Yes.
Have you seen it yet?
I have. Of course I have. I'm
making sure.
Are you kidding
We'll talk
me?
about it at the beginning of our next episode.
God.
So we appreciate you guys for listening to this week's episode of One Nation Under Crime. We will see you here same time.
Different crime.
Maybe not crime.
Oh, different situations.
Stories.
Yeah.
And remember that there isn't always liberty and justice for all. Goodbye.
Bye.